Welcome back to the Question Table, a podcast of the Way Home Ministries. I'm your host, Sylvia Geronimo. Have you ever sat in a place where the whole world seemed to pass you by? Have you ever sat somewhere and just watched people? An airport, a shopping mall, a busy cafe where the world seems to pass by in waves. There's something about those places and about people watching. There's something about those spaces that you don't have to try, you just notice people. The diversity, the movement, the faces, the expressions. And some people catch your attention immediately. They hold it. Some pass by almost invisibly. And if you're honest, there are moments when you find yourself thinking, that person is beautiful. And that's not a controversial statement. There are beautiful people in the world, and that's just a fact. And yet, beauty is not fixed. It shifts across cultures. Every culture has its own standard, its own lens, its own definition of beauty. What one place celebrates, another might overlook. And yet, across cultures, we all recognize beauty when we see it. Or at least we think we do. And we've built entire industries around it. The cosmetic industry alone is worth billions. The fashion industry, skincare, fitness, it all rests on a promise that you too can become one of the beautiful people. So here's the question that has been sitting with me. What makes a physically attractive person less attractive? Not over time and not just with age, but because standards shift. But in a moment, what is it that can undo beauty almost instantly? So what makes a physically attractive person less attractive? And here is the why behind the question. I have found that this question matters because it reveals something deeper than preference. It exposes what we truly value. Because if beauty can be undone in a moment, then maybe what we're drawn to isn't just appearance. Maybe it's something beneath the surface that either confirms or contradicts what we see. And if that's true, then this question becomes less about others and more about us. What are we actually responding to? I've noticed something in myself, and maybe you have too. I can see someone who is physically striking, someone who, by every cultural standard, is attractive, someone who fits every category the world would define as attractive, someone who would easily belong on a screen, in a magazine, in the category of beautiful. And then they speak, or they interact with someone, or they react under pressure. And within minutes, sometimes seconds, something shifts. Something changes the way I see them. And it's not their appearance, and it's their presence. And rudeness as a way of doing that. And arrogance does too. You note a dismissive tone. There's a lack of kindness, an edge in their words that cuts rather than builds. And almost instantly, what once seemed beautiful becomes less so. Something dramatically less. So I think there is something about the tone of a person, the way they speak, the way they carry themselves, the way they treat others especially, that can dismantle outward beauty almost instantly. But the reverse is also true. You can meet someone who might not stand out in a crowd by the world's standards, and yet their kindness and their gentleness and their attentiveness, well, it draws you in. It reframes everything. Suddenly, you're not just seeing them, you're beholding them. And I think that raises a deeper question. What is it that we are actually responding to? Because if beauty can be undone so quickly, then maybe what we're calling beautiful beauty is not as solid as we think. And that's the tension we live in. This is where it becomes difficult for us because we do not have access to people's hearts. We see only what is in front of us. We respond to what is visible. We are by nature drawn to appearance, to what we can immediately take in and understand. But Scripture calls us over and over again to something entirely different. It tells us to be gentle, to be kind, to be patient, to be forgiving. And rudeness and arrogance quietly dismantle all of that. And so does vulgarity, which feels like that is the tone of the day. There's swearing and cussing, sexual innuendo, indiscretion, lewdness, a kind of boldness that puts everything on display without restraint. And it's in your face, and it's normalized and often applauded. But if we're honest, it reveals something deeper. It reflects a heart, a value system, a way of seeing the world. And no matter how much the world celebrates it, it is not beautiful. There's something in us that recognizes that, because beauty at its core seems to carry a sense of dignity. And when that dignity is stripped away through words and through posture and through attitude, it changes everything. And this is the tension for the people of faith. Our faith gently but firmly reorientates us, because Scripture tells us something very different about beauty. Because the one we follow did not enter the world in a way that would have drawn attention. The prophet Isaiah says this about Jesus: He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. That's in Isaiah 53:2, and that is striking. The very embodiment of truth and goodness and love did not stand out physically. The one we love did not draw people in by his appearance. And then in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul takes it even further. He says in 2 Corinthians 5:16, he says, "So, from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view." In other words, we are invited to see differently, to look beyond what is immediately visible. And that's a shift for us. It's kind of a retraining of our eyes. Even early in Scripture, when God is choosing David to be anointed king over Israel, we are told that he tells Samuel, "The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." I think, if I'm honest, today's episode feels less like a question and more like an observation that won't leave me alone, because it's been lingering with me. It follows me into these ordinary places where I people watch. It follows me into conversations, into what I'm watching on the social media networks and platforms, into what I laugh about or even what I'm thinking about. And it sounds something like this: what am I applauding? What am I laughing at? What am I watching or just occasionally repeating? What am I slowly becoming comfortable with? What am I emulating without realizing it? Who am I secretly following? You see, these questions feel a little bit more personal, don't they? Because it's one thing to sit in a public place and notice what feels and looks beautiful or not beautiful in others. But it's quite another thing entirely to turn that same lens inward and begin to ask, what am I drawn to and why? Because over time, what we consistently applaud begins to shape us. What we laugh at forms our instincts. What we watch trains our eyes. What we tolerate slowly becomes what we accept. And what we follow, quietly and privately, begins to disciple our hearts in ways we may not even recognize at first. And that's where this observation begins to deepen. Because maybe the question isn't just what makes someone else less attractive. Maybe the deeper question is, what am I learning to call beautiful? So there's been a passage that has been gently redirecting me, almost like a compass, when I realize I've drifted. You find it in Philippians 4:8, where Paul writes, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." I've read that verse so many times, but recently I started to see it differently, not just as a list of virtues, but as an invitation, almost like God is saying, this is what beauty looks like for me. This is not surface level beauty. It's not curated beauty. It's not generated beauty. It's not culturally approved beauty. But it's something deeper, something lasting, something that reflects God's heart. And suddenly this passage becomes incredibly practical because it gives me something not just to look at, but more importantly, something to look for. I'm going to say that again. It gives us something not just to look at, but more importantly, something to look for. And not just in theory, but in real everyday life. So I started trying something simple, and I invite you to do the same. When I'm in those places where I naturally observe people, a cafe, a waiting room, a walk through town, an airport, I begin to shift what I'm paying attention to. Instead of asking, who stands out? I start asking, what stands out? Where do I see truth? Where do I notice something noble? Where do I catch glimpses of kindness, of patience, of quiet goodness? Where do I see something that feels pure, not perfect, but sincere? Where do I see something lovely, not in appearance, but in spirit? Where do I see something admirable? And it's surprising what begins to happen, because once you start looking for it, you begin to see it everywhere. And you see it in the way that someone listens without interrupting, in the way that someone speaks gently when they could have spoken harshly, in the way that someone shows patience in a moment that most people would rush through, in the quiet and noticed choices that reflect something deeper than appearance ever could. And suddenly you realize, I'm seeing beauty, real beauty. The kind that doesn't fade when the conversation starts or ends, the kind that doesn't disappear under pressure, the kind that actually grows more visible the longer you pay attention. And so I began to think of it this way, and I invite you to do the same this week. What if you treated this like a gathering evidence? You go out there and you start gathering evidence. Not in a clinical or detached way, but almost like a collector, a quiet observer of beauty, taking each day, taking one word from that passage, just one. So maybe today it's true, whatever is true. And throughout the day, just simply pay attention. Where do I see truth? Where do I hear it spoken, even when it's costly? Where do I notice integrity? And then record it, remember it. And maybe it's not even on a piece of paper, but maybe it's just in your attention, in a story you tell. And then the next day, maybe it's what is noble. And you begin to notice dignity and a strength of character in someone, and a quiet refusal to lower yourself to what is easy or expected or arrogant or rude. And another day it's purity, and then another day it's lovely and what is admirable the next day. And slowly, over time, you're not just observing people, you have become a collector of beauty. And not the kind that the world markets, not the cheap kind, but the kind that reflects the heart of God. And you will notice too that something will begin to shift in your heart, in your life, because what you look for, you begin to value. And what you value, you begin to celebrate. And what you celebrate, you begin to cultivate in your own life. And that's the quiet power of attention. It forms you and it humbles you. Because the more that I began to see what God called beautiful, the more I realized something else. Left to myself, I would miss it. I would be drawn to what is loud and what is obvious and what is culturally affirmed, and maybe even confuse boldness with strength and crudeness with confidence and exposure with authenticity. And what I would slowly begin to call those things beautiful, they would not be. Not in the way that it would last and not in the way that it would reflect the one I love. And that's where grace comes in, because the truth is we are surrounded by grace. Not because we've created it, but because God in His kindness continues to pour it into the world, because He has not given up on the world. He pours grace into the world daily and consistently and quietly. He pours grace into people who choose kindness when no one is watching, in the moments of restraint, in the world that heals instead of harms. And He pours grace in lives that reflect something deeper than appearance. And if that grace was not present, if it was not being poured out again and again, we would be left in the dark. The kind of darkness that doesn't just obscure beauty, but it redefines it. A darkness where we begin to call what is empty beautiful, where we begin to applaud what diminishes, and where we celebrate what ultimately leaves us hollow. And so this becomes more than an observation. It is an invitation to restrain our eyes and realign our hearts and participate in something different. So my friend, maybe this week, you don't need to change everything, but just begin here. Take one word from that passage each day and then pay attention. Notice it in others. Call it out when you see it and encourage it and celebrate it and let it shape what you admire. Let it gently challenge what you've been applauding without realizing. And as you do, you might find something surprising. That you're not just seeing beauty more clearly, but you've become someone who reflects it because you are beautiful. Real beauty is not what first captures the eye. It's what endures when everything else fades. And the more we learn to see what God calls beautiful, the more we begin to live in it.